a recent article I wrote on the election of directors in the United States, I addressed the question why shareholders in the United States do not really have a very strong voice in appointing directors, and often the election of directors is controlled by the existing board of directors. I find three basic explanations for this reason historically, and I make the point that all of these reasons are changing. There is an evolution in the regulation that is moving away from this system. However, I also argue that this is not sufficient, and there are some additional reforms that might be necessary in the United States in order to really empower shareholders in the election of directors. And in this respect, I think that for once, American law could look at Italian law and use some of the institutes that have been developed in Italy. The first of the three historical reasons why directors are able to control elections of their fellow directors is called plurality voting. Under a plurality voting system, it's enough to be elected director to receive a relative majority of the votes casted in a general election. For these reasons, it's very easy for the candidates suggested by the existing board to achieve the required majority. The second reason is that broker-dealers traditionally were entitled to freely vote the uninstructed shares that are deposited with the brokers themselves. As a consequence, very often broker-dealers would simply vote for the candidates proposed by the existing directors themselves without really exercising an independent judgment, or even less so, without obtaining instructions from the shareholders. The third reason has to do with proxy solicitation. Traditionally, only directors were allowed to put the names of their candidates in the proxy statement that would circulate among shareholders. As a consequence, shareholders were not allowed to access this proxy document and were not allowed to put the names of their own nominees before the shareholders' meeting. All the three reasons I mentioned to indicate that directors have too much power, or traditionally have had too much power in the selection of their fellow directors, are now changing. In fact, a lot of corporations have shifted from plurality voting to majority voting. Secondly, the discretionary voting of broker-dealers for uninstructed shares is no longer a rule, it has changed. And thirdly, the SEC has recently enacted specific rules concerning the access to the proxy statement by shareholders that can now add their nominees to the ballot prepared by the corporation itself. Notwithstanding the evolution of these rules, my point is that the current situation is not still enough to really empower minority shareholders. What might be really necessary is to have a system in which the controlling shareholder appoints the majority of the members of the board, but some places on the board are reserved for minority shareholders. This is a rule that is currently in place in Italy and might be useful to export it to the United States to create a more democratic corporate scenario.